This afternoon, I am in Cleveland, Ohio, talking with Kathleen M Carrick, who is retired from the positions of Associate Professor of Law and Director of the Case Western University Law School Library. Kathy, as is our custom, could we begin by learning a little bit about you as a person or a human being?
Sure.
Could you tell us a little bit about your life now, especially that you're retired, and perhaps earlier?
Do you want me to go all the way back, or?
That's your choice. You can
Well,
you
I
can
will.
tell the whole story or any selected part of it.
I'll go back because I think it's interesting. Part of my story, I think, is as a woman who became a director in, I guess, one of the early times.
It was tough for women. I mean, guys came out of school and we walked into, sooner or later, usually pretty soon,
Yeah.
directorships, but you had to fight the other battle.
Well, I had a pretty well. I wasn't thinking of being a law librarianship person when I grew up. I wanted to be a journalist, and I always knew I needed to make a living because I was a blue-collar family, and I knew I had to put food on the table. So when I went to college, I studied journalism, got out, couldn't find a job except for the women's pages, didn't want the job in the women's pages, so I went, it's right at the time of the Pentagon Papers and Watergate and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought I would go get a research degree, and they would eat me up at Time magazine. Well, they didn't, and I did get my master's at Pitt, and then I got a job down at the Plain Dealer, which is the Cleveland City newspaper,
Mm-hmm.
and I was a research associate there for the editorial people. And it was interesting, but I was a very frustrated person because I would be doing research for these people, and I would get to a point where I would say, well, and there's these really wonderful papers over in this archives in the City Hall basement, and I need to go over there. And they'd say, no, you're not allowed to do that. We'll give it to an employee, one of the reporters. And so this guy who's totally green to this story, and wasn't a very good writer, would go over and find it, and he'd get the byline. And it was a very frustrating time for women in that field. You could go into women's pages. We had an archivist who was a wonderful photographer, and what she was delegated to do was file the pictures as they came in and take care of the very, very fabulous pictures that they had in the history of the PD. But she was a wonderful photographer, and she actually was told in an interview that, oh, we can't send women out to take a picture. My God, you might see a dead body or something, and we'd have to have people with you. You can't just go by yourself. It wouldn't be appropriate. And so that's really what we heard. And so I decided that I needed to get another degree, and so I looked around and I could do a JD at night. So I went to Cleveland Marshall. I studied at night. After a year, I realized I was at a dead-end job at the PD, and it was going to take me 4 years. I could do 3 years. I went and did my 3 years. During that time, I was fortunate enough to get under the arm of Barty Wolf.
Oh yes, Barty.
Barty Wolf was this gentleman, and I'll explain him to the audience. He was sort of heavy set, and he had this always mustache, and he was always doing this.
Looked the same towards the end of his life too.
And he would swear. He swore a blue and he was a confirmed bachelor, and it was very gruff, and he was very meticulous about statistics. Do you remember his statistics?
Oh, he used to send me those, and it'd be huge. I had to have a whole box to put them on. They were so thick with all these papers.
Yeah. He was the one for numbers. And he had me opening the library in the morning and closing at night, and when he figured out that I had a library degree. And at the end of my stay there, I was looking at jobs. I actually went down to Florida and been offered a job at a big law firm as an attorney, but I'd take care of the library too. And it was too hot down there for me. But he said, Carrick, I'm making $26,000 a year. Who's going to pay you to do if it's $26,000 a year, you'd be a law librarian. That's a good job. And so I looked and I thought, somebody's paying him $26,000.
That was a pretty good salary in
That
those
was
days.
a very good salary. I was in the 70s. And so I said, okay, and I put my name out there, and I got a few jobs. I was lucky to go up to Buffalo, and it was at a fortuitous time for me to go to Buffalo too. I just fell into it really up there. Unbeknownst to me, I got there and they did not really have a director that was a librarian. They had a wonderful man named Ray Newhouse, who was the person that probably taught me more about administrative policies and how to be an administrator than anyone else I've ever met, including all the deans I've ever worked under. And about the first 2 months or so that I was there, they said, oh, and by the way, we're going to have a national conference here next year, and wouldn't you like to be in charge of it? And I said, okay. All I could think of is my sorority in college, I had been the president, and so, I had done, things like that, sure. So I said, okay, and all of a sudden I was in charge of local arrangements for this research convention that, and the next thing I know, I was meeting a young man from Texas called Robert Baring, and Bob would come up, and he was the associate at the time, and the first thing he said to me, have you ever met Roy Mirsky? And I said, no, and he said, oh, and he just looked at me. And now you have to know Bob too, and I'm sure you have had his tapes.
And Roy as well.
Yeah, and so Bob said, fine. He can be a little demanding. And I said, oh, okay. I had a demanding boss down at PD. She was crazy. She was literally crazy. So I said, okay, that's fine. And we got it up together. And Roy would come out, and some of the people would hate his guts, and some of the people would like him, and that was just the way Roy was. Very meticulous. But it was such a wonderful time for me because I met everybody. I didn't realize that everybody that came to that program was the who-who of law librarianship, of academics anyway. And there was a lot of wonderful people that I met and knew for the rest of my career. It was just amazing.
Well, Barty Wolf started off with Roy Mirsky at the University of Texas, Tarleton Law Library. He was the supervisor of night circulation or something for a while when I first met him. And then he came up here and
Cleveland State.
Yeah, he was at Cleveland State right when OBAR was coming in.
Well, that's 70s, when I was
and
there.
You were involved in that.
Well, that God bless Barty, he made sure that we knew. I was teaching OBAR. That's why I got the job up in Buffalo, because I knew OBAR, and I've been teaching it for a year and a half. And so I thought, oh, sure. And they said, oh, and I won't tell you who I was up against, but it was a pretty good person. And they chose me because I knew OBAR.
Well, he went in there as head of reference or something, didn't he?
I was there as the head of reference for a year, and then I became the associate.
Yeah.
And in 3 years, I became the director, which was, that was very fast. And I look back at it sometimes, and I think it was probably a little bit too fast, but it was a
Why not
thing.
when you're having fun?
Yeah. Up there too, one of the wonderful things I had, the people that had been there, Morris Cohen was there. He had been the director up at Buffalo, and he had bought all these old books. And
Morris was that kind of a librarian.
Yes, he
really
was. He was wonderful. Obviously, he was the historian.
He must have still been maybe at Penn at that time. Or
At
maybe,
that time, he was
maybe
probably
Harvard.
at Penn.
Yeah.
But they had all these books that he had gone out and bought, like for $10 and $5 and $25, and he had put them all in this big room up in the at that time Buffalo had 7 floors, but the top floor wasn't finished. So they had this room and it had all these books in it. And I was a frustrated historian. If I had, my druthers, I'd have a PhD in history. And so when I went up there to look and see what they had, it was like, and I remember being in library school at Pitt and having done a rare book exhibit, or, class, and this guy had all this incunabula and all these old books. These weren't illustrated incunabula, but they were old and they were something. And it was so exciting. And so we actually were able to hire a young man who finally went on into law librarianship, and he became a director, and I can't remember his name now. But we cataloged that whole thing, and we called it the Morris Cohen collection, and it's still there at Buffalo, and it's probably one of the finest rare book collections that is available.
Yeah. Well, Morris, many of us in our generation were we were into management, which was required, and technical into making the places grow and run properly. And Morris was a different model. He was more like the librarians of the preceding us by quite a ways. I mean, the 20s and 30s, he was much more of a scholar. Or even some of the World War II people who had come from Eastern Europe after the war ended, or sometimes before if they got out.
Well, Belvoir Halevi, that's the gentleman up in Toronto at the time, and that was one of the best things about Buffalo, is that we could go up to, we call ourselves Buffalo, some kind of conjunction of Buffalo and Toronto, because we went up there and exchanged ideas.
Not very far apart, actually, physically.
Yeah. And I used to smuggle up New York wine to him. But he was just wonderful. And the way he taught legal research, he said, is that he never prepared a class. He would just walk out into the library with his students and take some books off the shelf, throw them on the table, and explain them to the students. And the students would learn from that. He was outrageously extravagant, but he was a great teacher too. So Buffalo was an interesting place.
It sounds like it very much. Now you rattle off some rather significant names in our field of leadership of that era. Do you count any of them, or maybe others, as mentors?
Well, Barty Wolf for sure, because he
Okay.
got me in. I mean, he's the hook that told me I was stupid if I didn't come in.
Is that how he is?
Yes. Well, he sort of told me.
I didn't think
well,
smart members would phrase it quite that way, even if they really believed it.
That was Barty, though. You had another. Oh,
He was
actually,
candid.
expletive. You would be expletive if you didn't take this. Yeah, if you didn't look at this job. Yeah, he was. Ray Newhouse was my really practical guy. He had just recently died. He was a law professor at Buffalo. Wonderful, crazy law professors at Buffalo. They were the critical legal thought people. And so that was a whole mind-blowing thing too. They never dressed their people in white overalls, teaching classes, and the crits were very contemporaneous and very liberal group of teachers.
We
at the
had
time.
several of them at American U, and then of course Harvard tore the place apart. The differences between the crits and the critical legal and the traditionalists.
If you're a crit, you're a crit. If you're not, you're not.
Yeah.
It was but we never never gowned for graduation. We didn't do that. They were one of the first schools not to have A's and B's. They had pass, no fail.
Pass fail.
Yeah. It was a very liberal, open thinking place.
I think we had pass fail when I was at Yale.
Yeah. Well, that was Yale.
But then they went to high pass,
Yeah.
pass, low
Yeah.
pass. It sounded an awful like ABC without the letters.
Yeah, well, that was kind of like, everybody said, well, half the class got high pass, but we had, it was a good time.
Mhm.
The winters were terrible. I learned how to
Yes,
ski.
I've seen pictures on television of what happens when the lake is just lined up right with the wind and Buffalo is at the wrong end.
Well, Buffalo, it's interesting. When they built that university, they built it with the law school out there first. It was one of the first buildings.
Uh-huh.
When I got there, there was a huge open plain there. It was wetlands, and somebody really sold the University of New York a pretty penny there. And I was really impressed when I got there, when I interviewed, because they had what I thought was handicap lines all around campus. I thought, this is really a good school. New York really must be up for the handicap. I realized later that it was so that you didn't blow over when the wind blew. Literally,
And maybe
you'd
you
have
could
to be there,
Help find your way
yeah,
to the
start
next
finding
building too.
the
if it
students,
was
we
really
would have
white
students.
out.
Yeah, whiteouts, yeah. It was
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
I would have staff members that would call me up and say, I got to the end of campus, but I can't get on because there's a whiteout. I can't see any roads. And you would just have to feel your way. If you haven't been in a whiteout,
I've never had the pleasure, and I'm not eager to try and experience it.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
But it was a beautiful place, beautiful in the winter and in the summer. And it was very good to me. It was really very good.
Now, in 1980, you were still there, and you became actually the director at that point, and assistant professor of law.
Mhm.
So, now, how did life change for you with that appointment, or did it?
Well, it did at that time. SUNY Buffalo was one of the few places that still had the academic person who was the director at the law school also had a responsibility to the university.
Mm-hmm.
Although my faculty status and tenure would be in the law school, I still had responsibilities to the university, so I reported financially to the university, and that was very interesting.
So you didn't get the library budget through the law school, technically?
Mhm.
Oh?
Which was really interesting, and it was a sharp difference from what I experienced later, and I could appreciate the difference because Wade Newhouse, the gentleman that was the director when I got there, had went down and had sat down and shown minute by minute or year by year how the law school had been shortchanged by budgets. And the money had to come from the university, not from the law school.
Yeah.
And he got
other priorities, didn't they?
Yeah, and so it was wonderful because every time I wanted something, I had the School of Law saying, "Oh yeah, we needed this, and this is what's going to make us great." And so the university would turn around and give us the money, and so I was happy with the dean was happy with me. And everybody was.
Well, later the American Bar Association mandated as much as they dared that the law library budget come through the law school to sort of eliminate some of the political shenanigans that were probably going on
At that time.
Yeah, and probably not just at Buffalo.
Oh, but it was interesting. It was actually a line item in the state budget.
Yeah.
For our budget.
Of course, you were. When all that was occurring, when they put it through the law school, you in some ways just were changing who the fox in the house was.
Yeah.
The provost or somebody in his bailiwick or hers, or the dean of the law school.
Actually, it was interesting because the provost, the Buffalo had a pretty good seat in the administration there. The dean became the provost, and they were pretty well taken care of for a while. I don't know how it is now, but.
When you were at Buffalo, especially in your last role, which you had for about 3 years, did you ever actually teach as a professor? Or?
Yes, we would teach both in the law school and in the library school.
Oh.
And I liked that very much. We always laughed that the library students were much more interested in the class that the law students sort of rolled their eyes.
What did you teach at the library school?
Legal research, administration, I think, one year. And I think that was it.
Yeah, that sounds like a bit of a curriculum for law librarianship.
It was fun. It was fun. And the enjoyment that I got from the library students was very high. I had really good people, Marcia Zuber, Nina Cascio. There are people who are still there too. And they had a lot of good people that stayed there a long time.
It must have been very satisfying.
Well, it was a good job.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't have left.
But you did.
I did.
Around 1983, you
Yes,
came
I-
here to Cleveland
Cleveland.
and Case.
Um,
And served for about 30 years
Yeah.
as director. You want to talk a little bit about that overall experience?
Yeah. Well, I came back to Case. I wasn't their first choice, by the way. I can tell you a little bit about that if you want.
Let's not any of us get into that because we might tarnish our egos.
Oh, well, thanks to
But we
people-
got the jobs.
Yeah,
Those
we
of us
got the
that
jobs,
them.
yeah. Yeah. I had, grown up in Cleveland, and Case was always a very well-respected school.
Uh-huh.
My parents still lived here in Cleveland. My sister, there was just the two of us, my sister and myself. She had gone to Duquesne and in Pittsburgh and fell in love and got married and had this wonderful family, but never came back to Cleveland. So at that time, my parents were getting older, and the job here made a lot of sense for me to come back and take care of them in their older age. And it was a good job. And
Plus, in the winter, you don't get
I
quite as
don't-
much
yes,
lake effect
yes.
snow. You did some.
I have to say that Buffalo, it was very intimidating, especially for a single woman by herself. At the first year there, I had a car that the floater in the front motor wouldn't turn over. It would turn over once, but then I would go so far and it would stop, and I'd have to get somebody to turn it over for me. So I literally would have to go out and flag somebody and have them help me. And in Buffalo, when it's raging snow and there's snow, you just can't do that. And the first year I was stupid enough up there, I didn't rent a garage. So every day I had to dig out
So you had to dig the car out.
Yeah, so the second year I had a garage, but then they'd plow me in and I'd have to dig out of the garage. But it was just very intimidating. You'd have to, at the beginning of the year, acknowledge the fact that you were going to have some days that you couldn't get out of the house.
Mhm.
So you would have your movies, your books, your food, your drinks, everything that you had.
That's right. We didn't have our computers to sort of sit there and do all our regular work most of it.
So you'd have to, have your little stash and just accept the fact that you were going to be in.
Imagine you kept the refrigerator full too.
Yeah, oh yeah. And I lived close to the stool pool, so there would be times that I would be the only one coming in like for 6 weeks, six weekends. And that kept me there and not coming back home. And at that time I had a social relationship which died because of the cold weather was not conducive to coming back and forth, let's say.
Well, that happens.
Yeah, that happened. So anyway, I came back to Case, and it was very interesting. It was a big change because Case, as a private school for one thing, doesn't have state funds. It seemed like it was very wealthy. They had a huge, they still have a very healthy endowment. It's the old Harvard of the Midwest. Supposedly that's what they were trying to make it at the time that it was established. It was very well respected. It had gotten into hard times in the 1950s. They pulled it out, and they had hired a new dean, Ernie Gellhorn, who was in making waves. And he had been at 3 other schools and had gotten, like, he lasted 2 years and they fired him or he left.
Yeah.
And he came
He
into,
was telling the central administration what they ought to be hearing, but
Yes.
didn't want to hear perhaps.
Mhm.
I remember that name.
Yeah.
He was quite
yeah.
well known as a dean.
Yeah. Well, and so I decided to come work for him.
Uh,
I followed a gentleman who, as you were saying, that was one of the old scholars. He was Australian/German, and a wonderful scholar. He had translated German codes
mhm.
and had been there for about 16 years. When I went, I found it easy to make some changes. As it was easy up in Buffalo, I could bring in O-bar. You know, I was the magician, I could bring in O-bar and I knew how it worked. Although the frustration up there is that you had to go through New York because you had lines.
Oh.
And I have to tell you I should talk a little bit about technology because I sort of grew up on that, I suppose. But I came back here and it was home because O-bar is Ohio Bar Association. Actually,
But
was
you still had to communicate through New York, huh?
no up in Buffalo you did.
Oh, in Buffalo.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, because it was putting in the lines and everything. And up in Buffalo, I remember having to justify getting Westlaw too, because they said, well, why do you need O-bar and Westlaw? It was hysterical at that time because it was just so new that no one knew what they needed.
Yeah, I mean, they looked like they were sort of the same thing from
Yeah.
two slightly different approaches. And
It was-
maybe for a while they were.
Yeah. We justified it as trading tools for the students. But, up in Buffalo, I remember getting the first computer lab in, and we actually, the students really, it was dedicated terminals. So that you had to teach them the whole big, the O-bar terminals. When I got here, we put in the regular terminals, and the students hadn't ever sat in front of a computer terminal. We had to put games on the computer terminals so that the students would go to the terminals and actually
Sort of
start
learn how
playing.
to turn them on and off.
Can you imagine that?
Well, I can, because I was part of the same era. I mean, yeah, I remember when, I remember also, maybe I should clip this because I don't know if I want it in here, but when we first got Lexus, the dean would come over with visitors and he wanted us to demonstrate this fancy new gadget, and I was just panic stricken because I wasn't that much into it. Until I learned that if I put his name in, all of his writings would come up.
Yeah.
And boy, I had a demo already.
Yeah, that's right. That was very good. Yeah.
Yeah,
It was really something snazzy and sexy at the time.
it really was.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you wanted to maybe say a little more about the technology of the era. Remember, we had those dedicated huge terminals for Lexus
Yeah.
that looked like small desks.
They were when I got here in a case, they still had one.
Oh, did they?
The early ones.
Yeah.
And they had it in the room.
Mhm.
It was the first computer that had been in a academic university law library setting from the beginning. That was it.
Now, was that one where you had a telephone sitting on
Oh,
the
yeah.
side and you had to go and dial up literally?
No, it wasn't.
Wait for the computer to
They had
answer?
replaced that.
Oh,
but
they had gone
we
away.
had those done.
More direct
Yeah.
modem. Yeah.
No, it wasn't quite that big, that old, but it was a renovated old one like that. But it was still there, and that's the only thing they had. God bless Simon Gorn was the gentleman's name. Wonderful scholar. Very German in his outlook, though. He had a cage that he had all the books that people wanted that was locked. And the first weekend,
So they'd be on the shelf when someone came along looking for one instead
Well,
of stolen.
I remember going down before I even started, and there was a student, and he was kind of looking at the cage like he was looking at a monkey cage. And I went to him and I said, "What are you looking for?" He says, "I want that book in there." And I said, "Well, can't you get it?" And he says, "It's locked." And I said, "Well, I'll ask people at the desk." And he said, "No, they don't have a key." And I
Simon really wanted to be protective of the books.
on the weekends, nobody had a key because
Wow.
nobody worked on the weekends.
Wow.
So I had a lot that I could do and make a change.
Yeah.
And I knew that was going to be so we had a lot to do. But it was interesting, the first time I went to Germany after that, and I walked into a German library and they showed me an old Gutenberg that was chained to a wall. And I thought,
one of those. Yeah,
that's where Simon got it.
Yeah.
Was that whole idea that you had to protect a book because you'd lose it.
Well, he was part of an era of ex-European, many of them legal scholars who would come during or around the time World War II or right after. In those days, they couldn't practice law in this country because of often the citizenship requirements, to say nothing of the culture and language differences. And many of them did gravitate into our field. I remember those early annual meetings. A lot of them were in the leadership, and it was interesting to meet many of the people.
Simon was a very, very brave man. He had actually escaped doing WW2, and I remember the story of how he had saved his wife. Literally, through the jumping off the ship and swimming with her to shore. He was a big, strong man, and really a very intelligent person.
I had a older colleague on the faculty at American U who was one of the kids that got out of Germany. His parents were Jewish, and they got him into England. He was part of that group, and then later fought in the war in the British Army, and then came back and went back to school. And they were still the old paternalistic approach, and these young ex-soldiers were back there, and it was a bit of a strain on everybody.
Which reminds me of a story. Should I interwind stories like this?
Oh, feel free to.
Because
remember, this is your story. You can tell it any way you want.
Well, I remember when you said about people in WW2. Roy Mirsky was very proud of himself as having fought in the Battle of the Bulge and been wounded a couple of times over there. And so if you ever had the chance to be around him when he was in that area, he would go on and on about that and show you his wounds in his arm, his hands. So, I don't know that we had anybody else that was back there, because I guess he was very young when he went.
He must have been,
Yeah, because then he went back and went to school then. But
it was an interesting era. When I was president of ALL, I went over to the bio meeting in Britain, and it was in Manchester. And after the formal banquet and everything, the mayor and the mayoress of the city invited some of us, including the American visitors, myself and my wife, and Carol Billings and her husband Warren, and I think Jim Heller, and maybe his wife. And a few of the locals that were leaders, up to the old traditional mayor's apartments. And they started talking about the war like it was a week ago. This building over there, that was bombed. It was like this was the mid-90s, 50 years after the war, and it was like it was last week.
It's amazing, in the 80s I was over in Germany and in Russia and in different places, and people did talk, and you'd see people with severed arms, and it was still very close, and they all had stories, and they were the preservation of records and items, and their stories was very precious to them.
Very much, yeah. Well, sort of speaking about professional associations and so on, since I sort of stole the show briefly and introduced it. You've been involved in professional service. I know you've been chair of several of ALL's committees over the years, major ones. Chair of the academic special interest section, and you were leader in the ALL's chapter, the local chapter here, the Ohio Regional Association of Law Libraries. Is there anything about the kind of that work that you'd like to tell us a little bit about?
I think the local networks are great. I find that true for almost any organization that is national. When you have local people, it's important to get to know them, because they are the people that you work with every day, and you can call up and say, hey, I need something. And they usually understand what you need. up in Buffalo, we had a really very strong Aluni, was the name of the group, Alunis. I remember one time, and this was Bill Hine, and I haven't even talked about the Hines. Part of the Buffalo experience was I got to know the Hines.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
that's their headquarters.
Yeah, I have to go back and talk about them because I knew some of the Hines people.
Well, you probably knew Bill Senior as well as the president.
No, I didn't know
or
Bill
didn't you know?
Senior.
He died somewhere around the time you went there.
Yeah, no, I didn't know Bill Senior, but I knew who was the uncle that was blind.
Oh, Fred Dennis.
Fred Dennison. Oh my God.
Yeah, and he was
Yeah.
deaf.
Yes,
Maybe he was blind too.
he was blind too. He had a hard problem seeing. I remember Karen Spencer and Marcia Zuber and I got in a car with him one time. He was driving. We were going off the campus, and he was turning around, looking over his shoulder, and because he couldn't hear us.
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh my God, you telling me to look ahead?" And Karen said, "Oh, you can't see anyway." And I said, "Oh my God, what are we doing?" The Hines to me were like, "Wow, this is wild." But it was very close union with them, and I think they still have that with Buffalo because it was the game in town. And very
Well, the
close.
Hine
Very,
Company now is still headquartered
Yeah.
nearby, and
Mhm.
they're one of the largest employers in that region now.
really?
Yeah, I found that on their
Wow.
website. They were mentioning it.
Yeah. Or do you remember the old Main? Have they moved out from that? Remember they had the car dealership that had the heavy floors, and that's where they had all the books.
Yeah, no, they are gone, I think, as
Yes,
far as
yeah,
I know,
there.
because they're out in it's Gettsville, or I'm trying to think of the name of the town. It's a suburb, and I think they have a whole new physical plant.
Yeah, they
there.
wrote things so because that was downtown on Main Street by the Anchor Bar.
Yeah.
So every time we
So,
went
so
down
you
there,
got to know Bill Jr. now, and more
Yeah.
and more as Bill.
Yeah, and Bill Jr., who's now is in charge now.
Well, he's been the chairman of the board for some time. But, when he first, his father died, and sort of.
No. I know that. I mean, it's his son.
Oh, Sean.
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 Yeah, Sean. That's what I'm thinking of.
Yeah,
Sean.
he is emerging. I mean, he and
Mhm.
another young colleague are
Yeah.
sort of sons of some of the previous, the current generation of
Yeah.
leaders. And the plan, I believe, is to sort of let that evolve until
Mhm.
they sort of succeed
Yeah.
to the job.
Mhm.
Just sort of like the people in Britain at the Buckingham Palace, sooner
Well,
or later.
that's- yeah.
Except maybe
I mean,
it
those
won't
kids-
take so long.
We knew him when he was a little boy, Sean.
Yeah.
And we saw him grow up, and so we knew that
Yeah.
he understands and
He's
appreciates
mid-career now. I
Yeah.
mean, he knows his business, presumably. He either do by his point in life, or he'll never know it.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he does.
And I think that's what we all kind of missed from people like that, and the different people that used to sell us the books
Yeah.
and knew who we were and what we were doing.
Yeah, sort of the Dick Spinelli generation. He was the last of those who would come, and he knew you as a person, and in a way that you felt it was an appreciated knowledge.
And he knew all your colleagues, so he would tell you
Well,
who
yes.
whose family had expanded.
That's right. We didn't have listservs and stuff to share this, although I don't think
Facebook
they
was
do.
not- yeah,
but,
Facebook
didn't
was
have any
Dick's
of that.
thing, yeah.
So
Yeah.
Dick and his colleagues at his level were sort of the early version of how you found out about a lot of this stuff.
But I digressed from the association when I went back up to Buffalo and Aluni. Orel was a great group of people too. Very interesting because it has a lot. I think with the regional organizations, you get to know a lot more of the divergence of the different types of libraries, like the court librarians and the firm librarians. Those are the people that's how I really got to know what those people were going through and what they were suffering or experiencing as a profession. I knew some of the top people. I hate to say that because it sounds awful, but nationwide I would know the people that Carol Billingsley and things like that, but people like that. But locally, I would, you really have to see people who are struggling with their budgets and can tell you that, well, this is going on. And I got involved with the Ohio Bar Association at their library group. And so it was real interesting to see how the bar here worked and actually supported or didn't support the libraries. It was fascinating, and I got to know El Podboy, who was very good.
That's right.
He's retired now.
He is, and I had the chance to chat with him.
Yeah.
I think it was a year ago. He got us into a library at one of the nearby colleges that he had an affiliation with. He taught.
Ursula or Notre Dame, probably.
Ursula.
Ursula, yeah.
Yeah. And we had a fun time.
Yeah.
We were in a public area, and the students would come by, so we'd have to pause briefly while they cleared up from behind us going out in or out of the library. But it worked.
Oh, to do his interview, you mean?
Yeah.
Because he and Mary and his wife have a nice condo with her dogs. I think they're really enjoying their retirement. Jane Novak, too, has retired from Cleveland State.
The scary thing is so many of our colleagues either have retired or are in the process of seeming to do it rather.
Well, I always thought we should retire as early as we could, especially with all the technology and all the good young people coming up.
Well, I can still remember many years ago, that I'm not dated too more precisely than that, I was sitting at an Association of American Law Schools meeting next to a very prominent director of another law library, and she was saying that with this new IBM PC stuff coming in, just no way she was going to stay active and have to learn how to cope with all those changes. So she retired, but it was probably time anyhow. They just gave her kind of an excuse to do what she probably wanted to do really anyhow.
But overall, sort of leads my mind actually into the Ohio area of the technology and why OBAR actually started here, which I think is a fascinating story that I had tried and I failed to write something about. I was writing it with a gentleman who had been involved. He wasn't a law librarian. Bill Haas, I believe is his name. I might have that wrong. But he had all the materials that the Ohio Bar Association had when they were actually developing it, and why they developed it, and why it was successful, and how Mead actually bought it over, and why Mead bought it over. And all of that information is, unfortunately he got cancer and he died before we could write the book. And so I tried with a couple of other people. I would go like Bill Harrington. You remember Bill Harrington? He actually he's written a couple of strange books, but he was one of the first people in Lexus and Jerry Rubin. And I interviewed those guys, and they were just crazy. I'd say, well, I really want to write a book, a story about, how it happened and why it was you guys. And they say, oh, I already wrote it. I wrote that, and that's my article, and that's the story. Yeah. And they wouldn't talk to me. Their egos. And you think about it, though, to have undertaken something like that, they'd had to have egos and knowledge that they were something special, and they were all cocky, Eastern trained folks.
You often still see that in some of the leaders in the high-tech industry.
Yeah.
Now it's interesting, you talk about the history of OBAR and Lexus, and OBAR becoming basically the beginning of Lexus. David Badager, our colleague who was a firm librarian for many years in New York City, I interviewed him for this project, and he talks a lot about the era that developed some of the stuff that occurred first and then emerged as OBAR and eventually as Lexus.
Firms, that would
and
be
it's all in his interview, which is a long one, but it's, in my opinion, That's a fun thing to hear.
You know what? I remember going over to England, and it was one of the programs was supposed to be introducing to the the counselors over there, and they would bring a woman, a secretary usually, along with them, and she would type, and they would talk, and she would type, and we would, and most of the people at me were really upset. They said, you know, you have to think, you know, think and react, and you know, build your strategy.
But it was
and the attorneys would say, I don't type.
Well, it
I
was
refuse to type.
the way it was, and I mean, an attorney typing was unheard of. You had an expert, but much more modestly paid expert to do the typing. But I remember, I think in fact it's David describing in his interview how it was, and they were training. The attorneys would show up with the secretary who would sit at the terminal. Attorney would stand there and tell her what to do, and, what to type.
Same thing, yeah.
Yeah, but it was a cultural thing.
Yeah.
And same thing in England.
Yeah.
I mean, my father's generation, he was an attorney. I don't think he, I mean, we had a typewriter at home because I had to type papers for school, but that was all right. I never saw him use it.
I remember in school, a lot of the guys didn't type.
Yeah.
And I had, ironically, in high school, I had taken a typist because I didn't know, you know, women were supposed to know how to type, so I learned how to type.
Well, I learned to type along with most of the guys at my high school because we realized when we got to college, we had to type papers.
Yeah.
And there were two ways to do it. One, do it yourself.
Yeah.
Or two, pay someone else to, and that was a no-brainer as to how we were going to resolve that.
And as a journalist, I learned to type and to write as typing. So it didn't hurt me at all. But it was really interesting, and the evolution. As soon as the students would get into power in those firms, they would know. And it was, you know, nowadays, students don't even
Well,
think
the
about it.
outstanding joke is the
you know,
student sitting there with a computer screen of some sort in front of her, and behind a whole wall of books. And the punchline is, if it's not on that computer screen, that student has no idea what it is. What it is, and yet the whole wall behind them might be full of it.
Yeah, it was a strange time, and I wish, you know, to try to capture that is really how it changed so fast, how people's minds got around it. Have you talked to Marion Parker? Because she did a lot of work with them.
Yeah, I don't think I have. No, I don't.
Because she worked for Rex, you know, and saw a lot of that going on. But the Mead people themselves were really a fascinating group too. Yeah.
Well, sort of by way of that, Kathy, I think we're probably nearing the end of today's conversation, and I've skipped over a couple of things that I think we've already covered, if that's all right. But if there's anything we haven't talked about that you would like to bring up, you know, now's sort of your opportunity.
Okay. I think I'd like to touch base again about the reason why Ohio was able to build the Lexus, what became Lexus, when New York wasn't able to do it, Pittsburgh wasn't able to do it, but the people in Ohio were able to do that. And I think it was because they had their Midwestern guts, and they knew if they failed, hey, it was going to be okay. And then, you know, people remember that Mead was a paper company, and they were told to diversify. And I should put in a plug for the papers of all of that are down at Case Western Reserve. We have them in that. Deb Dennison has arranged them all, and so they're available, so you can go and look at the contract. You can look at the original study that was done by, I think it was the Albright group, that says to me, you better diversify. You know, there's a computer company called, you know, that you might want to pick up and think about that.
I guess.
Yeah, and it's just fascinating to think.
Now, was Mead always in Dayton, or I know the final combined?
No, they were in Dayton. Yeah.
Yeah. So is that,
Yeah.
it was sort of
And think about OCLC. OCLC is in
Ohio,
in
the
Columbus.
original name, Ohio. Yeah,
Mhm.
the old was for
Ohio
Ohio
was
College
open and-
Library
yeah.
Consortium.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I knew when I got back here, I should say this too, the change in library schools. I came here in part because Case had a very, very good library school. It was closing.
Oh,
And it was closing because at that time you had to spend $14,000 to get that degree.
mhm.
And that people at the university said that it wasn't worth it, that they couldn't turn people out and they wouldn't make $14,000.
They wouldn't make enough to service the debt.
And so
yeah.
myself, the medical librarian, and the archivist went together and we made a proposal and said, look, we will guarantee you that we will have programs that will turn out people that will make more than $14,000 a year. And they said no, that it was
Yeah.
not a program they wanted. And
Well,
so
it may also be that they were driven by the fact that their governing board wanted them to downsize something, and
Yeah.
what academic programs
Yeah.
might be most
Yeah.
easily downsized without too many
Mhm.
repercussions.
And the one thing I did touch on is the difference between a private university is that now I had to talk to my dean about the budget.
Yeah,
And so the adversary point went from the university library and the university budget to the dean and the dean's budget. And as I'm sure you've heard from a lot of people, that it became very adversarial as we became the obvious biggest budget item that was flexible in a budget.
mhm.
And so the budget was
Well,
always an
in any
area.
law school budget, there are two huge parts to it, and then a lot of smaller ones. One is the faculty salary base,
Mhm.
which is
You
not so
can't touch
readily
it, yeah.
touchable, especially if it's tenured in. And the other is the library budget,
Yeah.
especially the book acquisitions part of it.
And some deans don't really recognize that, and they walk in and they really do not have the
Well,
academic and administrative background.
a lot of
that most
people who
librarians do.
aspire to or become deans are teachers.
Scholars, yeah.
Yeah, and this is something
Yeah.
they've never experienced.
Yeah.
They don't practice. Some become deans who've been associate deans or something,
Yeah.
but a lot of them, it's sort of, this is it. Suddenly there they are, and
Yeah,
on a huge learning curve.
some make it and some don't.
Yeah.
And some make it out of our skins, I'm afraid.
Well, that's probably always been the case.
Yeah, but what else did I want to say? The women. The one article that I wrote that was recognized as sort of important, that talked about how men and women rose to become academic directors differently. That men usually got their law degrees first, and then the library degree, and then they became directors shortly thereafter.
Mhm.
And most of the women at that time, at least, were had been working in the library and then picked up their law degree.
Yeah, they came in as librarians,
And
but
so
not
they had a-
double degreed librarians.
And a different approach to the profession. But that was changing a little bit, and what I was finding is that the way to get ahead at that time was to move a lot.
Mhm.
You had to move to get ahead. I was fortunate to be able to get promoted up at Buffalo and then to be able to get to Buffalo to Case. I was offered a couple of promotions that would have called for me to get out of town, and at that time I couldn't leave my father.
Yeah.
So I declined them. But in hindsight, that would have been a better move for me professionally to make. And what I found in that article was that women were making those decisions. That a lot of women at my age, you had Kathy Price, Lottie Gazray, Joyce Altolomakia.
Yeah.
If they got married, they never had kids, they got divorced, they did not have a family because they were taught, it was taught, but it was expected that you had to be flexible. You know, if you had maternity leave, my God, was not something to talk
Family
about.
medical leave today.
I
Boy, that
remember
was controversial.
actually not too long ago, at one of our dean searches, a case one of our wonderful candidates was a woman, and it was, discussed that she had just recently had a baby, and she was not feeling well.
Oh.
And so she should probably not be able to be dean. Now she is on the Court of Appeals of the Federal Circuit Court.
So, somehow
of the 6th,
can handle the work.
Yes, and yes.
Well, we are right now, this is September of 2016, and there's a presidential race, and without getting into the merits or whatever of either candidate, one of them is a woman, and it looks very possible that she may well emerge as the victorious candidate, but even if she doesn't, who is arguing other than the other side that she's not qualified?
Yeah.
The arguments are very different. They're where they argue that she may or may not be qualified. It's with a few exceptions of late. It has nothing to do with gender. In fact, in this day and age, if they say too much based on gender, there's going to be pushback. Yeah. From what I understand.
Yeah, I mean, this particular woman pointed out to me that all the women at that time were making a lot less than the men, and that remained a fact for me, I know. And it was not very much you could do.
One of my mentors was Marion Gallagher.
Oh, yeah.
And Marion used to refer to a lot of these as the stay-at-home girls because they would never move, and as a result, their own salaries stayed down, and then it caused ripples to others because the market was depressed.
Marion, I forgot to mention her. She was wonderful. Beautiful mind. Wonderful support person. We had some really good women like that would come up to you and say, a lot of gas way, always plug in there and hold in and be there.
Well, some of these people would go around and make it their point to introduce themselves to people who they didn't recognize, especially those that look kind of new. And for a while, I mean, we even still, I think the tags are marked for your first meeting as a newbie. In some fashion, and they look for them and introduce themselves. And, and they were, they were our leaders in different. Those two in slightly different eras, but very much close together.
Well, and because we didn't have families, I think, unfortunately, fortunately, the profession became so important to us that we really identified to ourselves as the professional, and. Personally, I think that was probably not the best thing to do, but it was what we did to survive almost, and to get ahead.
It was tough to be a working mother. My own wife had gone back, and she was a nurse, but she taught at the college level, and she was about to start a job on the faculty. My younger child, was just starting school, first year. And about 3 days before school started, we got a call from the woman who was going to drive my son to the school, because we didn't have busing in that case, and with her son. And she said, I don't believe women should be working if they're parents, and so I won't go. And where we were, 4 days we had to scramble. We were able to do it, fortunately, but there were subtle problems with women achieving. I mean, nothing to do with their own talent. Some of it was other people that just had their preconceived notions. There was something inappropriate.
Well, I go back. I mean, when I was a journalist and I tried to get on to a magazine, Field and Stream, to write and be a secretary, and the guy said, "Oh, honey, I don't know. I don't think the old guys just aren't going to come up and tell you how big their fish is." So I didn't get the job because of that. Yeah. And I couldn't get on the city desk because it wasn't a woman's job. Yeah. But I'm happy to see it's changed. I'm proud to say I have a niece-in-law who is now the mother of a 3-year-old and a partner in a law firm in Pittsburgh.
And it works.
Yeah.
Well, as you say, times have changed. Women have a lot of ability, obviously.
Yeah.
And finally, it's being acknowledged in perhaps the right way, more than it used to be.
Yeah, but it's funny too, because my sister asked me one time, because I have a granddaughter who last year we had to put up a princess for her birthday, we had to put up a princess canopy and everything. And she said, "Does that bother you to see these little girls playing princesses? And you know, that's what they really want to get into." And I said, "No, because I think that they'll learn how to use that princess to they'll be strong little things. They're they're still women. They're still going to be girls, but they're going to be independent."
My daughter,
Yeah.
when she was about 8, had a canopy over the bed and pink and all that. Now she's a litigator.
See that?
No problem at all with figuring the role out.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think we
Well,
have greens and everything. so-
Maybe on that, should thank you for being
thank
part
you.
of today's conversation.
It was fun.
And in thanking you, I'm not only doing it on my own behalf, I get to be here and chat with you, but on behalf of Michelle Wu, Frank
Hi,
Hodak,
Michelle. Yeah.
and Dick Spinelli, our colleagues,
Hey, Spinelli.
with whom I have the pleasure and honor of putting together these
Yeah, I can't
conversations
imagine.
for the
Fun.
oral history of law litigation. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, goodbye and good luck on that. This is going to be fascinating, I think.